Rome, the city that became an empire. Before Rome ruled the world, it was nothing more than a cluster of huts on 7 hills beside the Tiber River. No marble temples, no legions, no emperors, just shepherds, traders, and farmers struggling to survive between powerful rivals. And yet, from this unremarkable beginning emerged an empire so vast that its roads still shape modern Europe, its laws still influence modern justice, and its language still echoes in our words, our institutions, and our ideas of power. Rome was not born great. It became great through conflict. Its story is one of relentless expansion and internal struggle, of kings overthrown, republics forged, and emperors crowned. It is a story of discipline and ambition, of genius and corruption, of unity and collapse. Rome conquered through steel and strategy, but it ruled through law, culture, and order. At its height, the Roman Empire stretched from the misty coasts of Britain to the deserts of Arabia, binding millions of people under a single system of governance. But Rome's greatest strength was also its greatest weakness. The same ambition that built the empire fueled civil wars. The same wealth that enriched Rome hollowed out its moral foundations. Power became centralized, loyalty shifted from the state to individuals, and enemies, both foreign and internal, began to test the empire's limits. Rome did not fall in a single moment. It fractured slowly. It adapted, endured, and resisted decline for centuries. And then, piece by piece, it unraveled. This is not just the story of emperors and battles. It is the story of how power is built, and how it is lost, how civilizations rise, and how even the mightiest can fall. This is the story of Rome. From myth to settlement, the birth of Rome, c. 753 to 700 BCE. Rome did not begin as an empire, a republic, or even a city of importance. It began as a cluster of huts on the banks of the Tiber River, surrounded by marshland, forests, and rival tribes. Its origins were humble, uncertain, and deeply intertwined with myth, a reflection of how Romans understood themselves and their destiny. According to legend, Rome was founded in 753 BCE by Romulus, a warrior raised by a she-wolf after being abandoned as an infant. Alongside his twin brother Remus, Romulus survived against impossible odds, a story that symbolized the resilience Rome would later claim as its defining trait. While myth shaped Roman identity, archaeology tells a quieter but equally powerful story. Shepherd communities gradually settling the Palatine Hill, drawn by fertile land, river access, and natural defenses. These early Romans were not alone. The region of Latium was populated by competing tribes, including the Latins, Sabines, and Etruscans. Survival depended on cooperation as much as conflict. Rome grew not through conquest at first, but through absorption, merging cultures, families, and traditions into a shared identity. This willingness to integrate outsiders would become one of Rome's greatest strengths. The settlement's location proved crucial. The Tiber River allowed trade and movement while protecting the community from direct coastal invasion. Hills offered defense, and nearby salt routes brought economic opportunity. Rome was small, but it was positioned perfectly to grow. Early Roman society was organized around family clans, known as gentes, each led by a patriarch. Loyalty to family, land, and tradition formed the foundation of Roman values. These early customs, respect for elders, discipline, duty, and communal survival, would shape Roman law, politics, and military culture for centuries. Yet Rome's birth was not peaceful. The legend of Romulus killing Remus reflects a deeper truth. Conflict was embedded in Rome's identity from the beginning. Struggle was not something to be avoided. It was something to be mastered. Romans came to believe that hardship forged strength and that destiny favored those willing to endure. By the end of this early period, Rome was no longer just a settlement. It was becoming a community with shared myths, traditions, and ambition. The seeds of expansion had been planted, not through power or wealth, but through adaptability, unity, and an unshakable belief that Rome was meant for something greater. Rome had been born. Its rise had begun. From kings to republic, Rome chooses its destiny, c. 616 to 509 BCE. By the late 7th century BCE, Rome was no longer a loose collection of huts along the Tiber. It had grown into a small but ambitious city-state, shaped by Etruscan influence, expanding trade, and increasing political complexity. Yet Rome's earliest political system, a monarchy, would ultimately plant the seeds of its own destruction. According to Roman tradition, the city was ruled by 7 kings, some Latin, some Sabine, and later Etruscan. These kings were not merely ceremonial figures. They acted as military leaders, judges, and religious authorities. Under their rule, Rome developed key institutions: city walls, temples, drainage systems like the Cloaca Maxima, and early legal customs. The monarchy provided stability, but it also concentrated power in a single individual. As Rome grew wealthier and more influential, resentment toward absolute rule intensified, especially among the Roman elite. Nobles, later known as patricians, wanted a greater say in governance. They supplied soldiers, land, and wealth, yet remained subject to the whims of kings whose authority had no formal limits. The breaking point came during the reign of Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, remembered in Roman history as a tyrant. His rule was marked by brutality, disregard for tradition, and contempt for the Roman aristocracy. But it was not political oppression alone that ignited rebellion. It was a personal crime that became symbolic of royal corruption. The assault of Lucretia, a noblewoman, by the king's son shocked Roman society. Her subsequent suicide became a rallying cry against tyranny. Led by aristocrats such as Lucius Junius Brutus, the Roman elite rose in revolt. The monarchy was overthrown, and the Tarquin family was expelled from Rome in 509 BCE. What followed was not chaos, but reinvention. Rome replaced kingship with a radically new system, the Roman Republic. Power was no longer held by one man for life, but divided among elected officials with limited terms. 2 consuls would rule jointly, each able to veto the other. This system was designed to prevent tyranny and force cooperation. Yet the Republic was not democratic in the modern sense. Political power initially rested almost entirely with the patrician class. Ordinary citizens, the plebeians, had little representation, setting the stage for future internal struggles. Still, the creation of the Republic marked a defining moment in Roman history. For the first time, Rome declared that no one was above the law. This transformation reshaped Roman identity. The Republic emphasized civic duty, sacrifice for the state, and loyalty to collective institutions rather than to individuals. These values would become central to Rome's future expansion, military discipline, and sense of destiny. Rome was still small, surrounded by rivals and vulnerable to attack, but it had forged a political system flexible enough to adapt, survive, and eventually dominate the Mediterranean world. The age of kings had ended. The age of Roman ambition had begun. The struggle for Italy, Rome learns to conquer. By the early years of the Roman Republic, Rome had survived kings, rebellion, and internal division, but survival was no longer enough. The city stood at a crossroads. Surrounded by rival peoples, wealthy city-states, and hostile tribes, Rome faced a single truth: expand or be destroyed. Italy was not a unified land. It was a mosaic of competing cultures. The Etruscans in the north, the Latins in central Italy, the fierce Samnites in the Apennine Mountains, and powerful Greek city-states along the southern coast. Each controlled vital land, trade routes, and resources. For Rome, dominance over Italy was not ambition, it was necessity. Rome's first major tests came through a series of brutal conflicts known as the Samnite Wars. The Samnites were skilled mountain warriors, masters of ambush and terrain. Early Roman armies, trained for open battle, suffered humiliating defeats. At one point, Roman soldiers were forced to pass beneath enemy spears in a ritual of surrender, a moment of deep national shame. But Rome did not collapse. It adapted. Roman commanders restructured their legions, abandoning rigid formations for flexible units that could fight on hills, forests, and narrow passes. Roads were built to move armies faster than any enemy expected. Fortresses were planted deep in contested territory, not just to defend, but to dominate. War by war, valley by valley, Rome learned how to fight smarter. Rome's genius, however, was not only military, it was political. Unlike many conquerors, Rome did not simply destroy its enemies. It absorbed them. Defeated peoples were offered alliances, partial citizenship, or protection in exchange for loyalty and soldiers. Former enemies became Roman allies. Allies became Romans. This system created something unprecedented. A growing military machine fueled by the very lands Rome conquered. By the late 4th century BCE, Rome had crushed the Samnites, subdued rival Latin cities, and pushed north and south across the Italian peninsula. When Greek cities like Tarentum called upon Pyrrhus of Epirus to stop Roman expansion, Rome faced professional armies and war elephants for the first time. Though Pyrrhus won battles, his victories came at such a cost that history would name them after him. Pyrrhic victories. Rome endured losses, but it never stopped fighting. Eventually, even Pyrrhus withdrew, leaving Italy firmly under Roman control. By the end of these wars, Rome had transformed. It was no longer a city defending its walls. It was a regional power commanding manpower, resources, and loyalty across Italy. Its armies were seasoned. Its roads stretched for miles. Its ambition had awakened. Rome had mastered Italy, but beyond the horizon lay greater enemies, richer lands, and wars that would decide the fate of the Mediterranean. And Rome was ready to meet them. Rome turns outward, the Italian wars and the making of a power. By the early 4th century BCE, Rome had survived kings, internal rebellion, and the fragile birth of the Republic. Yet Rome was still only one city among many in Italy. To the north stood the Etruscans, to the south the Greek city-states of Magna Graecia, and across the hills and valleys lived fierce Italic tribes who saw Rome as both rival and threat. This was the moment when Rome's destiny began to shift, from a city defending itself to a state determined to dominate its surroundings. Rome's expansion did not begin with grand imperial ambition. It began with survival. The Italian peninsula was a landscape of constant conflict, and alliances were fragile. Rome fought to secure farmland, trade routes, and strategic high ground. Victory meant food and stability. Defeat meant destruction. The early Italian wars tested Rome in ways no internal conflict ever had. Enemies like the Volsci, Equi, and Samnites were hardened warriors who knew the terrain intimately. Rome's traditional battle formations struggled in the rugged mountains of central Italy, forcing the Romans to adapt their military tactics. This period saw the evolution of the Roman legion, more flexible, more disciplined, and better suited for varied terrain than the rigid Greek-style phalanx. But Rome's greatest strength was not just how it fought, it was how it ruled afterward. Unlike other powers that crushed their enemies outright, Rome practiced a revolutionary strategy: integration. Conquered communities were not always destroyed. Many were absorbed. Some received partial citizenship, others full rights over time. Former enemies became allies, soldiers, and taxpayers. Roads were built, colonies established, and loyalty slowly forged through shared interest rather than constant fear. This approach transformed Rome from a city-state into a network of allied communities, bound together by law, military obligation, and economic benefit. Each victory expanded not just territory, but manpower. Every conquered Italian city meant more soldiers for Rome's legions, an advantage that would later prove decisive against far greater empires. By the late 4th century BCE, Rome stood as the dominant power in central Italy. The Republic had not yet crossed the seas or challenged global powers, but something fundamental had changed. Rome had learned how to fight long wars, how to recover from defeat, and how to turn enemies into partners. Most importantly, Rome had discovered its defining principle. Expansion was not just conquest, it was transformation. This chapter marks the moment when Rome ceased to be merely a survivor of history and became a force capable of reshaping it. The Italian peninsula was now Rome's proving ground, and the wider Mediterranean would soon feel the consequences. The Punic Wars. Rome faces Carthage. By the late 3rd century BCE, Rome had begun to assert itself beyond the Italian peninsula, encountering a formidable rival across the Mediterranean: Carthage. A powerful Phoenician city-state located in North Africa, Carthage dominated trade in the Western Mediterranean and possessed a wealthy, well-organized military. This rivalry set the stage for the Punic Wars, a series of conflicts that would define Rome's rise to power. The First Punic War, 264 to 241 BCE, began over control of Sicily, a strategically critical island for trade and military operations. Rome, initially inexperienced in naval warfare, built a fleet from scratch and innovated tactics, such as the Corvus boarding device, which allowed them to leverage their superior infantry on ships. After decades of grueling battles, Rome emerged victorious, gaining control of Sicily, which became its first province outside the Italian peninsula. The Second Punic War, 218 to 201 BCE, is legendary for the Carthaginian general Hannibal Barca, who famously crossed the Alps with elephants, shocking the Roman world. Hannibal won several decisive battles, including the Battle of Cannae, inflicting one of Rome's most devastating defeats. Yet despite his brilliance, Hannibal could not secure Carthage's victory. Rome's resilience, strategic counterattacks led by Scipio Africanus, and control of supply lines eventually turned the tide. Rome invaded North Africa, defeating Hannibal at the Battle of Zama, 202 BCE, and cementing its supremacy over Carthage. The Third Punic War, 149 to 146 BCE, ended with the complete destruction of Carthage. The city was razed, its population enslaved, and Rome firmly established as the dominant power in the Western Mediterranean. The Punic Wars were more than military victories. They were a testament to Rome's adaptability, strategic innovation, and relentless expansionist drive. Beyond the battlefield, the wars had profound political and social effects. Rome gained its first overseas provinces, the aristocracy grew richer through conquest, and the state's military experience matured, preparing it for further campaigns in the Eastern Mediterranean and beyond. The Punic Wars marked a turning point. Rome was no longer just a regional power. It was a rising empire poised to reshape the ancient world. Conquest of the Hellenistic East, Rome meets the successor kingdoms. With Carthage defeated and Sicily, Sardinia, and Corsica under Roman control, Rome turned its attention to the Hellenistic kingdoms of the Eastern Mediterranean. These states, remnants of Alexander the Great's empire, were wealthy, culturally sophisticated, and politically fragmented, making them both tempting targets and complex diplomatic challenges. Rome's involvement in the East began with alliances and interventions. Initially, Rome acted as a mediator, called upon to resolve disputes between the kingdoms of Macedonia, Pergamon, and the Seleucid Empire. However, as conflicts persisted, Rome increasingly used its military might to enforce its will. The Macedonian Wars, 214 to 148 BCE, were pivotal. Macedonia, under kings like Philip V and later Perseus, challenged Rome's growing influence. Rome's legions, experienced from the Punic Wars, proved superior in strategy, discipline, and endurance. The Battle of Pydna, 168 BCE, ended Macedonian resistance decisively, transforming Macedonia into a Roman province and sending a clear message. Rome's power in the Eastern Mediterranean was unstoppable. Simultaneously, Rome faced the Seleucid Empire under Antiochus III, who sought to expand his influence into Greece. Rome responded with calculated campaigns, culminating in the Battle of Magnesia, 190 BCE, which limited Seleucid ambitions and extended Roman influence through client kingdoms and strategic treaties. Through these wars, Rome perfected a system of provincial control and alliances. Conquered territories were often allowed to maintain local rulers under Roman oversight, while friendly cities received privileges and protection. This blend of military force and political pragmatism allowed Rome to consolidate power efficiently without overextending its resources. The conquest of the Hellenistic East also brought immense cultural and economic gains. Rome absorbed Greek knowledge, art, architecture, and philosophy, profoundly shaping Roman culture and administration. Eastern trade networks enriched the state and its elites, fueling further expansion and laying the foundation for the Mediterranean-wide empire that would dominate the centuries to come. By the end of this period, Rome had transformed from a regional power of Italy into a Mediterranean hegemon, skilled in both warfare and diplomacy, and ready to extend its influence to every corner of the known world. Internal strife and the Gracchi reforms, Rome's growing pains. As Rome expanded across the Mediterranean, the Republic faced a new set of challenges. Internal social and political tensions. Military victories had brought vast wealth and territory, but they also created sharp inequalities. The aristocracy, or senatorial elite, grew richer through conquest and provincial administration, while small farmers and veterans struggled to maintain their land and livelihoods. By the late 2nd century BCE, these inequalities sparked the efforts of two brothers, Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, known as the Gracchi brothers. They sought to implement reforms to redistribute land, protect the rights of citizens, and limit the concentration of wealth in the hands of a few powerful families. Tiberius, elected tribune in 133 BCE, proposed legislation to reclaim public land illegally occupied by wealthy elites and allocate it to the poor. These reforms were revolutionary but deeply controversial. The Senate, threatened by the potential loss of power and wealth, resisted fiercely. Tensions escalated into violence. Tiberius was murdered, setting a dangerous precedent for political assassinations as a tool of power. His brother Gaius continued the reforms a decade later, expanding them to include subsidized grain, judicial reforms, and colonization efforts, but he too met a violent end. The Gracchi era revealed the fragility of Rome's republican system. Social unrest became a persistent problem, and political violence increasingly replaced debate. These events also highlighted the Republic's inability to adapt quickly to the challenges posed by rapid expansion, economic inequality, and the rise of ambitious military leaders. Meanwhile, Rome's military obligations contributed to the tensions. Citizen soldiers, often small farmers, were drafted for campaigns far from home, leaving their land neglected. Wealthy elites, who could afford substitutes or avoid service, grew ever richer, exacerbating class divides. The Republic's social contract, where military service, land, and citizenship were linked, was fraying. The reforms of the Gracchi, though ultimately unsuccessful, left a lasting legacy. They exposed systemic weaknesses, inspired future leaders to challenge the Senate, and laid the groundwork for the rise of strongmen and generals who would ultimately transform the Republic into an empire. In short, the internal struggles of this period demonstrated that Rome's greatest threats were no longer external enemies, but its own inequalities and political rivalries. Generals and legions, Marius, Sulla, and the militarization of Rome. The social and political unrest exposed in the era of the Gracchi brothers paved the way for a new type of leader. Ambitious generals whose authority rested on loyal armies rather than the Senate. Two figures, Gaius Marius and Lucius Cornelius Sulla, would redefine Rome's military and political landscape, accelerating the Republic's transformation. Gaius Marius, a talented general from a non-aristocratic background, revolutionized Rome's army through the Marian reforms, 107 BCE. For the first time, the army was open to landless citizens, providing pay, equipment, and the promise of land upon retirement. This expanded the recruitment pool, professionalized the military, and created legions personally loyal to their commanders, rather than solely to the Roman state. Marius's military successes, including victories in North Africa and against Germanic tribes, enhanced his political power and set a precedent for generals to leverage armies for personal ambition. Sulla, a patrician general and Marius's contemporary rival, took these developments further. During the Social War, 91 to 88 BCE, Rome faced rebellion from its Italian allies seeking citizenship. Sulla's campaigns were brutal but effective, demonstrating the growing reliance on military force to maintain Rome's cohesion. The conflict between Marius and Sulla escalated into Rome's first full-scale civil war, with Sulla marching his army on Rome itself, a shocking precedent that violated centuries of republican tradition. Sulla's dictatorship, 82 to 79 BCE, marked a turning point in Roman governance. He restructured the courts, weakened the tribunes' powers, and strengthened the Senate, but perhaps most importantly, he showed that military strength could dominate political authority. The Republic's institutions were under strain, and the balance between civilian and military power was forever altered. This era also set the stage for the rise of ambitious commanders like Pompey and Julius Caesar, who would exploit both the loyalty of their armies and the weaknesses of the Senate to achieve unprecedented power. Rome's expansion and wealth had created opportunities, but also vulnerabilities, as generals became kingmakers and civil war became a tool of politics. Pompey, Caesar, and the First Triumvirate power in threefold. By the late 1st century BCE, Rome was a republic in crisis. Wealth and military success had created enormous inequalities, while civil unrest and political rivalries destabilized the state. In this environment, three ambitious men, Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, Pompey, Gaius Julius Caesar, and Marcus Licinius Crassus, formed the First Triumvirate, 60 BCE, an informal political alliance that would redefine Roman power dynamics. Each member brought unique strengths to the alliance. Pompey, celebrated for his victories in the East, commanded immense military prestige. Crassus, the wealthiest man in Rome, provided the financial resources necessary to influence politics and elections. Caesar, charismatic and politically astute, brought ambition, popular support, and the vision to consolidate power through reform and conquest. Together, they circumvented the Senate's authority, demonstrating the growing influence of personal alliances over republican institutions. Caesar's Gallic Wars, 58 to 50 BCE, were central to the triumvirate's power. Through campaigns in Gaul, Caesar not only expanded Rome's territory but also built a loyal, battle-hardened army personally devoted to him. These conquests brought immense wealth to Rome, elevated Caesar's political standing, and positioned him as a rival to Pompey, despite their alliance. The First Triumvirate also highlighted the Senate's declining power. Legislative influence shifted from institutional debate to negotiation among powerful individuals backed by armies and wealth. This system, while temporarily effective, sowed the seeds of future conflict, as ambitions inevitably clashed. The alliance unraveled after Crassus's death at the Battle of Carrhae, 53 BCE, against Parthia, removing the balancing factor in the triumvirate. Tensions between Caesar and Pompey escalated, leading to political maneuvering, propaganda, and eventually civil war. Caesar's crossing of the Rubicon River, 49 BCE, became a symbolic and literal point of no return, signaling the end of republican norms and the onset of internal warfare. Julius Caesar, dictatorship, reform, and assassination. By 49 BCE, Julius Caesar had established himself as one of Rome's most formidable military leaders and politicians. His bold crossing of the Rubicon River signaled the beginning of civil war against Pompey and the Senate, an act that defied centuries of republican tradition and committed him irrevocably to seizing ultimate power. The war that followed was not just a contest of armies. It was a struggle for the very soul of the Roman Republic. After defeating Pompey at Pharsalus in 48 BCE, Caesar returned to Rome as the unchallenged authority. He was appointed dictator, a role that gave him extraordinary powers to enact reforms, pass laws, and reorganize the state. Unlike previous dictators appointed temporarily during crises, Caesar's authority became permanent, extending across political, social, and military spheres. Reforms and policies. Caesar's reforms were both practical and revolutionary. The Julian calendar. He standardized the Roman calendar, correcting inaccuracies that had accumulated over centuries. This reform aligned the civic and agricultural years and laid the foundation for the modern calendar. Economic and land reforms. Caesar tackled Rome's pervasive debt crisis by forgiving portions of debts and redistributing land to veterans and the urban poor. These measures not only stabilized the economy but also strengthened his popular support, as many ordinary citizens directly benefited from his policies. Extension of citizenship. He granted Roman citizenship to inhabitants of many provinces, integrating diverse peoples into the Roman political system and expanding Rome's base of loyalty. This inclusion also reflected Caesar's vision of Rome as a unified Mediterranean power rather than a city-state dominated solely by Italy. Governmental restructuring. Municipal governments across Italy and the provinces were reorganized for efficiency and accountability. By reducing corruption and standardizing governance, Caesar improved both taxation and administration, allowing Rome to better manage its growing empire. Military achievements. Caesar's military genius was unparalleled. His Gallic Wars, 58 to 50 BCE, not only expanded Roman territory but also secured crucial resources and wealth. Conquering Gaul brought Rome an influx of grain, silver, and slaves, and more importantly, legions fiercely loyal to Caesar himself. This personal loyalty became a double-edged sword. While it cemented his authority, it also fueled fears among the Senate that no other body could restrain his power. Caesar's campaigns were notable for their strategic brilliance, engineering feats, and relentless pace. He built bridges, fortifications, and siege works with speed that astonished his enemies. His use of intelligence, surprise, and psychological warfare, such as the intimidation of local tribes and alliances with certain factions, demonstrated that he was not merely a soldier but a master strategist and statesman combined. Political climate and assassination. Despite his popularity with the people, Caesar's concentration of power threatened the Senate and the aristocratic elite. Senators feared that the Republic, already weakened by decades of civil strife, would be replaced by a monarchy in all but name. Caesar's title of dictator for life and his public honors, including statues and unprecedented ceremonial recognitions, inflamed resentment among the patrician class. This tension culminated in the Ides of March 44 BCE, when a coalition of over 60 senators, including Brutus and Cassius, conspired to assassinate him. The conspirators believed that killing Caesar would restore the Republic. On that fateful day, Caesar was stabbed 23 times in the Senate House, a shocking act that plunged Rome into chaos and civil war. Legacy of Caesar's dictatorship. Julius Caesar's rule fundamentally altered Rome. He expanded its territories, reformed its administration, and redefined citizenship, leaving a state far stronger and more centralized than before. Yet his assassination underscored the fragility of political systems when power becomes too concentrated. His life and death were a turning point, the moment the Republic's centuries-old institutions began their irreversible transformation into the Roman Empire. Chaos and the Second Triumvirate. Rome at a crossroads. The assassination of Julius Caesar in 44 BCE plunged Rome into unprecedented political chaos. The conspirators, led by Brutus and Cassius, had hoped to restore the Republic, but instead, their actions unleashed a wave of civil wars, shifting alliances, and power struggles that would ultimately end the Republic itself. Immediate aftermath. Rome erupted in unrest. Public outrage over Caesar's murder, fueled by his loyal supporters, particularly Mark Antony, led to riots in the streets of the capital. Antony, as Caesar's ally and co-consul, leveraged his oratory skills and political influence to rally popular support against the conspirators. Meanwhile, Caesar's heir, Octavian, later Augustus, arrived from Illyricum, asserting his position as Caesar's adopted son and legitimate successor. Though only 18 years old, Octavian quickly demonstrated remarkable political acumen, understanding that survival in Rome now required both cunning strategy and careful alliances. Formation of the Second Triumvirate. By 43 BCE, three powerful figures, Mark Antony, Octavian, and Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, formed the Second Triumvirate, a formal political alliance sanctioned by law. Unlike the informal First Triumvirate, this alliance held extraordinary powers to prosecute enemies, redistribute land, and govern Rome and its provinces. The triumvirs aimed to consolidate power, defeat the forces of Brutus and Cassius, and punish those responsible for Caesar's death. The alliance, however, was uneasy. Each member harbored personal ambitions. Antony commanded the eastern provinces and had a strong military reputation. Octavian controlled the western provinces and commanded legions fiercely loyal to him. Lepidus, though politically weaker, held the office of Pontifex Maximus and controlled parts of Italy. Together, they wielded immense authority, but their cooperation was fragile and temporary, based on convenience rather than trust. The war against Caesar's assassins. The triumvirs moved swiftly against Brutus and Cassius, who had amassed armies in the eastern provinces. The confrontation culminated in the Battle of Philippi, 42 BCE, in Macedonia. After two decisive engagements, Both Brutus and Cassius were defeated and committed suicide, ending the last serious Republican opposition to the triumvir's dominance. Consequences for Rome. The aftermath of the battle allowed the Second Triumvirate to redistribute power, land, and resources according to their interests. Prescriptions. A brutal campaign targeting enemies and confiscating their wealth ensured that opposition was eliminated and funds were available to reward supporters and veterans. Rome, however, suffered from widespread instability and bloodshed, highlighting how the Republic's institutions had been irreparably weakened. Chapter 11 marks a critical transition. The Republic's structures remained, but the reality of concentrated power and civil war had set the stage for the emergence of a single ruler. While the Second Triumvirate maintained a fragile balance for a time, the seeds of conflict between Antony and Octavian were already sown, eventually leading to the final struggle for control over Rome and the Mediterranean world. Octavian, Antony, and Cleopatra, the final struggle for Rome. After the defeat of Caesar's assassins at Philippi in 42 BCE, the fragile alliance of the Second Triumvirate began to unravel. Octavian controlled the western provinces, Mark Antony ruled the eastern territories, and Lepidus remained politically marginal. While they had cooperated to consolidate power and eliminate rivals, personal ambitions and strategic disagreements soon brought Octavian and Antony into direct conflict. Antony and the East. Mark Antony focused on the wealthy and strategically vital eastern provinces, forming alliances with Hellenistic kingdoms and consolidating Roman influence across Asia Minor, Syria, and Egypt. His encounter with Cleopatra VII, the Queen of Egypt, would have far-reaching consequences. Cleopatra was a shrewd, politically ambitious leader who sought to protect Egypt's independence while expanding her influence over Rome's eastern territories. Antony and Cleopatra formed both a personal and political alliance, which enabled Antony to secure funds, resources, and additional legions from Egypt. Their alliance, however, was deeply controversial in Rome. Many senators and citizens viewed Antony as being unduly influenced by a foreign queen, undermining Roman traditions and provoking nationalist resentment. Octavian capitalized on this perception, portraying Antony as a traitor who prioritized personal indulgence and foreign interests over Rome itself. Escalating tensions. The years leading up to the Battle of Actium, 31 BCE, were marked by political maneuvering, propaganda, and the gradual erosion of the triumvirate's cohesion. Octavian consolidated his power in Italy, strengthened alliances with key senators, and positioned himself as the defender of Roman values and the rightful heir to Caesar's legacy. Meanwhile, Antony and Cleopatra prepared their combined forces in the eastern Mediterranean, amassing a fleet and an army capable of challenging Octavian's supremacy. The road to Actium. The confrontation became inevitable. Antony and Cleopatra's forces sailed from Greece toward Italy, while Octavian's legions and fleet, commanded by Agrippa, strategically blocked their advance. Octavian's careful planning, superior logistics, and political positioning gave him a decisive advantage. Both sides recognized that this battle would determine the future of Rome and the fate of the Republic. Cleopatra's involvement was pivotal. Her financial support, naval resources, and strategic counsel enhanced Antony's capabilities, while also intertwining the destinies of Rome and Egypt. Their partnership, both romantic and political, represented a dramatic challenge to Octavian, one that combined personal rivalry, military strategy, and the question of Rome's identity. By 31 BCE, all forces were poised for a decisive clash that would not only resolve the struggle between Octavian and Antony, but also reshape the Mediterranean world, marking the final steps in the transformation from republic to empire. Actium and the end of the Republic. The summer of 31 BCE marked one of the most decisive moments in Roman history, the Battle of Actium, where Octavian's forces clashed with the combined fleets of Mark Antony and Cleopatra. The battle, fought near the western coast of Greece, was not only a military confrontation but a symbolic struggle for the future of Rome. The battle. Octavian's fleet, commanded by his trusted admiral Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa, employed superior tactics, including blockades, strategic positioning, and disciplined formations. Antony and Cleopatra's forces, although substantial in size, were less cohesive. Cleopatra commanded a fleet of Egyptian ships, while Antony led the Roman legions on land and sea. The alliance was ambitious but ultimately undermined by divided command and over-reliance on naval strength. During the battle, Cleopatra made a sudden retreat with part of her fleet. Antony, bound by loyalty and trust, followed her, leaving the remaining forces vulnerable. Octavian seized the opportunity, routing Antony's troops and capturing or destroying much of the opposing fleet. This maneuver effectively ended organized resistance from the eastern provinces and sealed the fate of both Antony and Cleopatra. The aftermath. Following Actium, Antony and Cleopatra retreated to Alexandria. Their defeat shattered their power and morale. In 30 BCE, as Octavian's forces advanced on the city, both Antony and Cleopatra chose death over capture. Antony by falling on his sword, Cleopatra allegedly through the bite of an asp. Their deaths marked the end of the Hellenistic kingdoms and the final absorption of Egypt into Rome as a province. Octavian's consolidation of power. With Antony and Cleopatra gone, Octavian faced no significant rivals. He reorganized Rome's territories, established administrative reforms, and presented himself as the restorer of peace and stability. In 27 BCE, the Senate formally granted him the title Augustus, marking the beginning of the Roman Empire. While maintaining the outward forms of the Republic, Augustus held unrivaled authority, combining political, military, and religious power in a manner that would endure for centuries. The Battle of Actium was more than a military victory. It symbolized the transition from the Republican era of shared power and civil strife to a centralized imperial system. Octavian's triumph reshaped the Mediterranean, ensuring that Rome would no longer be a city-state dependent on assemblies and consuls, but an empire under a single, enduring ruler. Augustus and the birth of the empire. With the death of Antony and Cleopatra, Octavian emerged as the uncontested ruler of Rome, but he faced the challenge of transforming a state long accustomed to republican traditions into a stable empire. In 27 BCE, the Senate bestowed upon him the title Augustus, marking the official beginning of the Roman Empire and a new era of political, social, and military stability. Political and administrative reforms. Augustus understood that longevity required both consolidation of power and the illusion of republican continuity. He retained the Senate and traditional magistracies but ensured that real authority rested with him. By controlling the provinces, especially those with large armies, and appointing loyal governors, Augustus centralized political power while maintaining the appearance of shared governance. He also reformed the bureaucracy, creating a professional administrative system to manage Rome's vast territories. This included standardized tax collection, improved record-keeping, and a more efficient system of provincial governance, which reduced corruption and improved revenue flow to the capital. Augustus's careful balance of centralization and delegation allowed the empire to function smoothly over a vast and diverse territory. Military reforms and security. Augustus reorganized the Roman military, establishing permanent standing legions with professional soldiers loyal directly to the emperor. He stationed troops along the empire's borders, creating defensive lines and fortifications that secured Rome's vast territories. Veterans were settled in colonies, which not only rewarded service but also helped Romanize conquered regions, spreading culture, law, and loyalty throughout the provinces. The Pax Romana. Under Augustus, Rome entered the Pax Romana, a period of relative peace and stability that would last over 2 centuries. Trade flourished across the Mediterranean, cities expanded, and monumental construction projects, including temples, roads, and aqueducts, transformed the urban landscape. Augustus promoted cultural programs, literature, and moral legislation, fostering a shared Roman identity and pride in the empire. Diplomacy and expansion. While Augustus prioritized internal stability, he also secured Rome's borders through strategic diplomacy and selective expansion. Client kingdoms, alliances, and treaties stabilized regions such as Egypt, Spain, and the eastern provinces. Military campaigns were carefully calculated, extending influence without overextending resources. The empire's wealth, combined with Augustus's political skill, allowed Rome to project power without constant warfare, a contrast to the earlier republic's era of near-constant conflict. Legacy of Augustus. Augustus's reign transformed Rome from a city-state plagued by civil wars into a structured, enduring empire. He balanced military strength, administrative efficiency, and cultural integration, creating a model of governance that would influence rulers for centuries. The Pax Romana was more than peace. It was a demonstration of the effectiveness of centralized authority, strategic planning, and careful management of resources and people. Expansion and consolidation. Rome at its height. Following Augustus's careful establishment of imperial authority, Rome entered a period of strategic expansion and consolidation. The early emperors built on Augustus's foundation, extending Roman control across Europe, North Africa, and the Near East while strengthening governance and integrating newly conquered peoples into the empire. Military campaigns and territorial growth. Rome's legions advanced into regions previously beyond its control. In Gaul, Germania, and Britannia, Roman armies secured provinces and established fortifications to defend against local tribes. In the east, client kingdoms and annexed territories such as Judea and parts of Syria were integrated through a combination of military presence and diplomatic arrangements. North Africa, previously under Roman influence, was further organized to ensure efficient administration and economic productivity. Key military campaigns under emperors like Tiberius, Claudius, and later Vespasian expanded the empire's boundaries, bringing stability to frontier regions while demonstrating the effectiveness of Roman military engineering, discipline, and strategy. Roads, fortresses, and frontier garrisons ensured that legions could respond quickly to threats, maintaining control over vast territories. Administrative and cultural integration. Rome's strength was not only military but also administrative. Provincial governance was professionalized, with appointed governors overseeing taxation, justice, and local affairs. Conquered peoples were often granted partial citizenship or incorporated into the Roman system, fostering loyalty and cultural assimilation. Cities across the empire adopted Roman architecture, language, Latin or Greek, depending on the region, and legal frameworks, unifying diverse populations under a common identity. Cultural integration was further supported by the promotion of Roman law, public works, and urban development. Aqueducts, amphitheaters, temples, and forums were constructed in major cities, symbolizing Roman authority while improving the daily lives of inhabitants. Trade networks flourished, connecting Rome to the far reaches of the Mediterranean, the Near East, and beyond, creating economic prosperity and cultural exchange. Political stability and succession. The early emperors maintained political stability by establishing clear lines of succession and carefully managing relationships with the Senate and elite families. By balancing centralized authority with the appearance of republican traditions, they avoided the frequent civil wars that had plagued the late Republic. Augustus's precedent of combining military loyalty, administrative efficiency, and public support remained the guiding principle for his successors. Legacy of expansion. This era of expansion and consolidation allowed Rome to reach the height of its territorial power, securing borders and integrating diverse peoples under a cohesive imperial system. The empire's strength lay not just in conquest but in organization, infrastructure, and the ability to project authority over vast distances. Economic growth, cultural exchange, and military dominance during this period set the stage for the enduring stability known as the Pax Romana, establishing Rome as the preeminent power of the ancient world. Culture, innovation, and urban life, the flourishing empire. While Rome's military might secure the empire's borders, its cultural, scientific, and artistic achievements define the civilization's enduring legacy. From monumental architecture to literature, engineering, and law, Rome under the early emperors became a center of innovation and cultural integration that influenced generations to come. Architecture and engineering. Rome's architectural achievements symbolized both power and ingenuity. Emperors commissioned amphitheaters, aqueducts, temples, and public baths, combining functionality with grandeur. The Colosseum, completed under Vespasian and Titus, showcased engineering skill, social organization, and the empire's capacity for spectacle. Roads, bridges and harbors connected distant provinces, facilitating trade, military movement, and cultural exchange. Innovations such as concrete construction, vaulted ceilings, and advanced water systems allowed cities to flourish and remain functional across centuries. Literature, philosophy, and science. Roman literature and philosophy flourished alongside political stability. Writers such as Virgil, Ovid, and Livy immortalized Rome's myths, history, and values, blending Greek influence with uniquely Roman perspectives. Stoic philosophy, adapted from Greece, became influential among Roman elites, emphasizing duty, virtue, and rationality as central to governance and personal conduct. Science and technology advanced alongside culture. Roman engineers developed roads, aqueducts, siege engines, and military innovations that facilitated both conquest and civilian life. Medical practices, surveying techniques, and calendar reforms reflected a practical approach to knowledge, often blending empirical observation with inherited Greek theories. Urban life and public spaces. Roman cities were hubs of social, economic, and cultural activity. Forums, markets, theaters, and bathhouses created public spaces for interaction, commerce, and entertainment. Civic infrastructure, from sewage systems to public granaries, ensured that urban populations could thrive. Festivals, games, and religious ceremonies reinforced social cohesion and imperial ideology, reminding citizens of Rome's power and the emperor's role as both protector and benefactor. Cultural integration across the empire. One of Rome's greatest achievements was its ability to integrate diverse cultures. Conquered peoples were often allowed to maintain local traditions while adopting Roman law, language, and civic structures. This combination of assimilation and tolerance fostered loyalty, reduced resistance, and created a shared sense of identity across the Mediterranean. Trade, art, and religion flowed freely, linking provinces from Britannia to Egypt and Syria, creating a cohesive yet diverse empire. Legacy of the Roman cultural flourishing. The cultural and scientific achievements of this period were not mere ornamentation. They were tools of governance, cohesion, and projection of power. By combining urban planning, engineering, literature, and philosophy, Rome created an environment in which its citizens, soldiers, and subjects could thrive, while the empire's authority was reinforced daily in the public sphere. This period of cultural flourishing ensured that Rome's influence would extend far beyond its political and military dominance, leaving a lasting imprint on Western civilization. Frontiers and conflicts. Maintaining the empire. Rome's expansion created unprecedented power, but it also brought new challenges. The empire's borders stretched thousands of miles, encompassing diverse peoples and landscapes, from the forests of Germania to the deserts of Arabia. Maintaining control required constant vigilance, strategic deployment of legions, and careful diplomacy. Northern frontiers and the Germanic tribes. Rome's northern borders along the Rhine and Danube rivers were frequently threatened by Germanic tribes, including the Cherusei, Suebi, and Marcomanni. The famous Battle of the Teutoburg Forest, 9 CE, in which 3 Roman legions were ambushed and destroyed by Germanic forces under Arminius, highlighted the difficulties of controlling these regions. Rome responded by strengthening fortifications, establishing limes, frontier walls, and outposts, and deploying permanent garrisons to deter incursions. Eastern frontiers and the Parthians. In the east, Rome faced the formidable Parthian Empire, a persistent rival for influence over Mesopotamia and Armenia. Conflicts included campaigns by emperors such as Trajan and Marcus Aurelius, often motivated by a combination of territorial ambition and the desire to secure trade routes. While Rome achieved temporary victories, the Parthians remained a resilient opponent, necessitating ongoing diplomacy, military readiness, and strategic marriages with client kingdoms. Internal rebellions and provincial challenges. Beyond external threats, Rome contended with internal unrest in its provinces. Revolts, such as the Jewish rebellions in Judea, 66 to 73 CE and 132 to 136 CE, required extensive military campaigns and resulted in significant social, economic, and cultural consequences. Rebellions were often fueled by local resentment against Roman taxation, cultural suppression, or political interference. The empire's ability to respond quickly and decisively was key to maintaining cohesion. Military innovation and administrative strategy. Rome's response to frontier challenges relied on both military innovation and administrative strategy. Fortified roads allowed legions to move rapidly across vast territories, while permanent outposts and forts provided both defense and deterrence. Diplomacy with client kingdoms, combined with targeted settlement of veterans, ensured loyalty and cultural integration in border regions. The emperor and his generals balanced force with strategic alliances, recognizing that military might alone could not sustain the empire. Legacy of Rome's frontier management. The management of Rome's frontiers demonstrated the empire's adaptability and resilience. By combining military discipline, engineering, diplomacy, and governance, Rome maintained control over a diverse and sprawling territory for centuries. These challenges also tested the empire's leadership, highlighting the delicate balance between expansion, defense, and internal stability that would shape the successes and vulnerabilities of Rome in the centuries to come. Wealth and trade, the lifeblood of the empire. Rome's vast empire was more than a political and military achievement. It was an economic powerhouse, sustained by extensive trade networks, agriculture, and resource management. The empire's prosperity was a key factor in maintaining stability, supporting its armies, and fostering cultural flourishing. Agriculture and resource management. Agriculture was the foundation of Rome's economy. Vast estates, or latifundia, produced grain, olives, and wine for local consumption and export. Provincial territories, such as Egypt, Sicily, and North Africa, became the breadbaskets of the empire, supplying Rome and feeding urban populations across the Mediterranean. The distribution of grain, particularly through programs like the Cura Annoni, ensured that cities remained stable and supported by steady food supplies. Trade networks. Rome's prosperity relied on a complex web of trade routes, both overland and maritime. The Mediterranean, often called Mare Nostrum, RC, served as a highway connecting Italy with provinces in Spain, Gaul, Egypt, and Asia Minor. Goods such as spices, silk, glass, and precious metals flowed along these routes, while Roman engineering, roads, bridges, and ports enabled efficient commerce. Trade was further enhanced by Roman currency, standardized weights, and legal systems that ensured contracts and property rights were enforced throughout the empire. Urban markets and economic hubs. Cities were economic hubs where artisans, merchants, and traders converged. Forums and marketplaces facilitated commercial exchange, taxation, and social interaction. Ports such as Ostia and Alexandria became centers of maritime trade, linking Rome to Africa, the Near East, and beyond. Local production, including pottery, textiles, and metalwork, was integrated into broader networks, creating a vibrant, interconnected economy that supported both elite consumption and the needs of ordinary citizens. Luxury and cultural exchange. The wealth generated by trade also fueled luxury and cultural exchange. Roman elites imported exotic goods, commissioned elaborate art, and patronized architecture that displayed their status. At the same time, ideas, religion, and cultural practices spread along trade routes, fostering a shared Mediterranean culture. Economic prosperity allowed for public works, festivals, and cultural institutions that reinforced the cohesion and identity of the empire. Economic challenges and adaptation. Despite its wealth, Rome's economy faced challenges, including inflation, corruption, and regional disparities. Emperors and administrators implemented measures to stabilize currency, regulate trade, and ensure equitable taxation. Infrastructure investments, such as roads, aqueducts, and harbors, not only facilitated commerce but also reinforced the state's control over economic activity, linking prosperity with political stability. Legacy of economic strength. Rome's economic system was a cornerstone of its power. By combining agricultural productivity, trade networks, and administrative oversight, the empire sustained millions of people, supported armies, and financed monumental projects. This economic foundation allowed Rome not only to dominate militarily but also to create a lasting cultural and social legacy that influenced civilizations long after its political structures evolved. Cracks in the foundation, political instability, and external pressures. As the Roman Empire reached its territorial peak, it also faced growing internal and external challenges. Maintaining control over vast territories, diverse populations, and a complex economy required strong leadership, yet political instability increasingly threatened the empire's cohesion. Political instability and succession crises. The later empire struggled with frequent changes in leadership. Unlike the early emperors who established orderly succession, later rulers often came to power through intrigue, assassination, or military force. Civil wars and competing claimants became common, weakening the central authority and diverting resources from governance and defense. The army's loyalty often shifted from the state to individual commanders, echoing the patterns seen during the late Republic, and creating a cycle of power struggles and instability. Economic and administrative strains. Economic challenges compounded political problems. Heavy taxation, inflation, and reliance on slave labor created regional disparities and social tension. The administrative apparatus, though sophisticated, became overextended, making it difficult to enforce laws, collect taxes, and maintain infrastructure across distant provinces. Emperors attempted reforms, such as Diocletian's division of the empire and new tax systems, but these changes often produced mixed results and increased bureaucratic complexity. External threats. Rome's frontiers were under constant pressure. Germanic tribes, including the Goths, Vandals, and Franks, increasingly challenged the northern borders. In the east, Persian forces tested Roman defenses along the frontier. In Africa, rebellions and incursions occasionally threatened critical grain supplies. The empire's military, though formidable, faced the challenge of defending immense borders simultaneously, straining both manpower and resources. The social and cultural response. Despite these pressures, Roman culture, law, and infrastructure continued to provide cohesion. Cities remained centers of trade and culture, and local elites helped maintain order in provinces. However, social unrest, including peasant revolts and urban riots, reflected growing dissatisfaction and the difficulty of sustaining loyalty in a vast, diverse empire. Legacy of crisis. The challenges of the later empire highlight the limits of even the most sophisticated political and military systems. Rome's wealth, culture, and institutions remained influential, but political instability, economic strain, and external threats foreshadowed the eventual decline of central authority in the Western Empire. These pressures set the stage for the final chapter of Rome's long and transformative history, demonstrating that even empires at their height are vulnerable to internal decay and external pressures. The fall of the West and the legacy of Rome. By the 5th century CE, the Western Roman Empire faced pressures it could no longer withstand. Political instability, economic strain, military overextension, and external invasions combined to bring centuries of imperial rule to an end in the West. Collapse of the Western Empire. Repeated invasions by Germanic tribes, including the Visigoths, Vandals, and Ostrogoths, eroded Roman control over Italy, Gaul, Hispania, and North Africa. The sack of Rome by the Visigoths in 410 CE, led by Alaric, symbolized the vulnerability of the once mighty city. By 476 CE, the deposition of the last Western emperor, Romulus Augustulus, marked the traditional end of the Western Roman Empire. Authority shifted to local rulers and Germanic kings, but the structures, laws, and culture of Rome endured in these successor states. The Eastern Empire, Byzantium. While the West fell, the Eastern Roman Empire, known later as the Byzantine Empire, continued for nearly 1,000 years. Centered in Constantinople, it preserved Roman law, administration, military strategies, and culture. Emperors like Justinian I sought to reconquer lost Western territories and codify Roman law in the Corpus Juris Civilis, ensuring that Roman governance and legal traditions influenced Europe long after Rome itself had fallen. Enduring legacy. Rome's legacy extends far beyond its political and military achievements. Its contributions to law, governance, engineering, architecture, and culture shaped the foundation of Western civilization. Roads, aqueducts, amphitheaters, and monuments demonstrated engineering brilliance, while Roman law and administrative practices influenced legal systems for centuries. Rome also left a cultural and intellectual imprint. Latin language, Roman literature, and philosophy spread across Europe and the Mediterranean, shaping education, religion, and civic identity. Christianity, which became the empire's official religion under Constantine, further carried Roman influence across the globe. Rome in memory. Even after the fall of its western territories, Rome continued to live in memory, symbols, and institutions. Medieval Europe drew inspiration from Roman law and governance. Renaissance artists emulated Roman architecture and literature, and modern Western states looked to Rome as a model of civic organization, infrastructure, and empire. Rome's story, from humble beginnings to a Mediterranean superpower, its transformation from republic to empire, and its eventual decline, demonstrates the complex interplay of military power, political innovation, cultural achievement, and human ambition. Though its political structures did not survive intact, the essence of Rome, its ideas, achievements, and lessons, continues to resonate in the modern world. The story of Rome does not end with the fall of its western territories or the eventual decline of the Eastern Empire. Its influence endures, woven into the foundations of law, government, language, architecture, and culture across the globe. Rome taught the world how to organize vast territories, govern diverse populations, and balance military power with civic administration. Its legal systems became the blueprint for modern jurisprudence, inspiring constitutions, courts, and civic principles in countless nations. The Latin language, once the tongue of emperors and citizens alike, lives on in Romance languages, scientific terminology, and academic scholarship. Architecturally, Roman engineering continues to impress. Roads, aqueducts, and monumental buildings exemplified a combination of utility and grandeur that shapes city planning and construction to this day. The Colosseum, aqueducts in Spain, and amphitheaters across Europe are enduring symbols of Roman ingenuity and ambition. Culturally, Rome influenced literature, philosophy, religion, and art. Its embrace of Greek knowledge and its own innovations created a legacy of learning, civic virtue, and cultural synthesis. Christianity, once a persecuted faith within the empire, became a world religion, spreading Roman ideas and structures across continents. Yet perhaps the most enduring lesson of Rome is the balance between power and responsibility. The Republic fell when ambition overshadowed institutions, the empire thrived when organization and governance were strong, and decline followed when internal decay and external pressures overwhelmed the system. Rome's story is a mirror of human ambition, ingenuity, and fragility, reminding us that even the greatest civilizations are shaped by choices, innovation, and the challenges of maintaining unity over vast lands and peoples. Today, Rome's presence is everywhere. In law, language, government, cityscapes, and culture. Its rise and fall are not merely history. They are a living guide, a testament to human potential, and a cautionary tale of the enduring consequences of power, ambition, and vision. Rome, in essence, never truly fell. It continues to echo through the centuries, inspiring, instructing, and reminding us of what civilizations can achieve and what they risk losing. Please like and subscribe for more historical content like this.